A Florida man has been arrested after he allegedly screamed the N-word at a black historian and others and then threatened to run them down with his car. This is according to the Miami Herald. Now, again, this doesn't surprise me because Florida, but nonetheless, more details. David Allen Emanuel, 61, was charged on Monday night with aggravated assault with a deadly weapon after he had threatened Marvin Dunn, a black historian and professor emeritus of psychology at Florida International University, and a group of people with his pickup truck last week. The incident actually took place on a road outside of a property that Dunn actually owns. So now, according to police, Emanuel had angrily approached the group of black men, primarily, who were standing just outside and they were talking. And Emanuel walks up and says, "What are you doing? What are you doing here?" "What do you mean, what are you doing here? What are we doing? We're having a conversation. What are you doing?" Apparently, black men in America are not allowed to hang out outside their own property on a public road. They're not allowed to do that, apparently. Now, Emanuel then got into his Ford F-250 pickup because, of course, and made several dangerous passes, almost hitting Doug Dunn at close to 50 miles an hour, according to one witness, all while repeatedly screaming, of course, racial slurs. Gee, I wonder if this guy qualifies as a racist. Now, look, this happened in the small town of Rosewood. So now Rosewood has an especially volatile past when it comes to racism. So now, and of course, there's a reason Dunn was there. He and his group were there to discuss clearing part of the 5 acres that he owns, which they happen to be standing outside of, for an event that the author will host next year, commemorating the 100th anniversary of race riots that had tore apart the small town in the early 20th century. The historian, who bought into the property for its historical value, also uses it occasionally to give local student tours. Now, I wonder, so we don't have any details on this or motive. Just could be random racism, which again is a thing that happens, or could it have been a little bit more targeted, considering how he is not only a black man but a professor who is, teaching history of racism in this country. I don't know if Mr. Emanuel knew Dunn was a historian or what he taught. It could all just be a coincidence, just complete irony. I don't know. It's Florida, so you can't really tell. Now, the reason, of course, that I bring up the fact that it's Florida is you have a governor there in office that is telling people that critical race theory is being taught in public schools or was taught in public schools, and that he had to ban it. He had to ban critical race theory, and he had to pass things like the Stop Woke Act because there is too much wokeism in our education system. And the critical race theory, we had to ban it because the whole idea is, we're not racist in this country. Of course not. No, the whole idea behind critical race theory is just to make kids feel bad. That's what it is. And you know what? When you make white kids feel bad, that's real racism. We need to ban that. No, and what reality, of course, what DeSantis is doing, like a lot of these Republican governors that have preemptively banned critical race theory, or what they claim to be critical race theory, is just really trying to ban, black history. That's it. Now, by the way, that makes Dunn's efforts that much more necessary. That he goes out there and actually teaches what really happened. The fact that Dunn was in Rosewood, again, not an accident. In fact, it was the site of a massive race riot that occurred in 1923. So what happened is there was a black resident that was lynched after a group of white people accused a drifter of raping a white woman in an adjacent town. Afterwards, of course, a literal lynch mob formed of angry white people and burned the city to the ground. Huh. Interesting. Now, the official death toll from the riots was six. Even although it is believed that as many of 100 people or more were killed during the rampage that saw all of the city's buildings burnt to the ground. This was a predominantly black neighborhood. Now, they didn't burn it down themselves. No, it was a white lynch mob. And it's now recognized as one of the worst racist attacks in a predominantly black community in history. Now, that is the type of thing that you would learn if you were allowed to teach black history. If you were allowed to teach critical race theory, because that actually talks about how stuff like that still has an impact in today. And obviously, there seems to be a good deal of racism left over in Rosewood. And it's reflected in the institutions, which again, critical race theory. Now, let's get to the institution, specifically the police. Okay? Police initially took no action after this complaint. During the incident, Bobby Previtt, a contractor who was working with Dunn, was so worried to the point of where he nearly used his own personal protection, right? His personal defense, he called it, which just basically means he had a gun. Now, thankfully, he didn't use it. However, he then contacted the Levy County Sheriff. So that good news, a good move on that, because thankfully he didn't use a gun, because then, who would have been arrested? Bobby Previtt. Dunn then contacted the sheriff, who ignored his emails and his calls for over a week. In one email, the historian said that the pace of the investigation had led him to believe the department was either grossly incompetent or racially biased. In another, Dunn asked for security during a press conference he said would take place on his property on Wednesday. No response, and of course the press conference had been canceled. Finally, he took to social media as well, posting about this to his 12,000 followers, and after a ton of pressure, both from the email campaign and on social media, here we had Mr. Emanuel getting taken into custody and getting charged with a third-degree felony with his bond set at about $50,000. You have to ask, why did it take so long? Again, you think if it were the other way around, for example, had Bobby Previtt shot and killed this white man in the truck, there would have been immediately an arrest. Of course. Even if it, again, at that point, absolutely would have been self-defense, especially under Florida's laws. Stand your ground. But look, that said, now that there's been an arrest, Dunn's happy with the result. He said this, quote, "I feel as if I got listened to. The police did their job." Isn't that amazing where, them doing their job, just the bare minimum of their job, is enough to get praise? I feel like they actually listened to me. Thank God. They did their job. Because in a lot of circumstances, unfortunately, when it comes to getting justice for black people who are wronged in this country, minorities, well, they often don't do their job. And they oftentimes actually turn it around on the victim and go after them. I mean, how often have we done those stories? Now, Dunn also said the FBI had contacted him on Tuesday and said that the Justice Department is aware of the incident, and so we might even have a hate crimes investigation happening on this. So, if that's the case, fantastic. Seems like a motivated hate crime to me.